One of the main components in Google Tag Manager are tags, triggers, and variables. What are they? How are they connected? I will answer that in this video. Hey, my name is Julius, and welcome to Analytics Mania's YouTube channel, where you can learn Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics. So you have Google Tag Manager account, Google Tag Manager container, and you have installed Google Tag Manager on your site. Now, the time has come for the real job, which is to manage your tracking and analytics codes with Google Tag Manager. And to properly do that, you need to understand the concept of tags, triggers, and variables, and how are they connected. This lesson is the part 3 of video where I teach beginners how to get started with Google Tag Manager. So if you missed the previous videos, I'll post the links below this video. Also, if you want to learn some additional details about Google Tag Manager as a beginner, I have created a free ebook which is called Google Tag Manager for Beginners. You will find the link below this video. Alright, so let's dive in. Let's talk about 3 main components of Google Tag Manager that you should be aware right now. The first one is tag. The tag is usually a tracking code that you want to implement on your site. It might be Facebook Pixel event tag, it might be Google Analytics page view, it might be Google Ads conversion code or whatever. So if you want to activate a certain tracking code on a site, that is a tag. Then there are triggers. Triggers are conditions when you want your tags to fire. So if, for example, you want to activate your Google Ads conversion tag when a visitor signs up for your newsletter, that is a trigger. Other examples of triggers might be a page view, a click of a certain button, when a visitor scrolls for more than 25% of your page, and so on. And then there is a third component, which is called variables. Variables are little data points that you can use in tags or triggers. Sometimes variables might contain more information. Sometimes variables are even more complex functions. But in this case, you should start simple. So you can just think of variables as data points that can contain a single value or maybe a bit more complex, but still some information, some data or some configuration. When I explain tags, triggers, and variables to Google Tag Manager users, I usually like to start with 3 questions. So the first question is, what do you want Google Tag Manager to do? So for example, if you want to track a conversion, that's a tag. If you want to implement a chat widget on your website, and that chat widget requires to add a code, that's a tag. Another example could be, if you want to track a page view and send that page view to Google Analytics, that is also a tag. Then the next question is, when do you want that to happen? So for example, if you have a Google Ads conversion tag, the question is, when do you want to track that conversion? One of the examples could be when a form is submitted, when a button is clicked, or something else. So all of these situations are triggers. And then the last question is what, when, or how exactly. So if you want to be more specific, that's where variables come in. For example, if you want to fire your tag on a page view, the question is, do you want to fire on all page views or do you want to fire on a specific page view? So if, for example, you want to fire only on one specific page, then the page address is the variable because you want to fire your tag only when a trigger is page view and the variable is, let's say, page URL contains thank you or order successful or something else. So let's go back to that very first slide where we had tags, triggers, and variables. So once again, tag is a tracking code that you want to fire, but I mean, not only tracking code, that code might not track users. That code might, I don't know, change the color of a button or something else. But in general, tag is a piece of JavaScript that you want to activate on your site. Then a trigger is a condition when you want to happen. And then variable is a data point or, I don't know, some set of information or maybe some function that you use to either to make the trigger more specific or to transfer that particular data to third-party tools. And I believe that variables are the most confusing. At least they were for me when I was just starting to learn Google Tag Manager. So we can take a look at this a bit differently. At first, we have a tag. In this case, it's Google Ads conversion tag. So what do we want to do? We want to send a conversion data to Google Ads. Then the question is, when do we want that to happen? And that's where triggers come in. And our condition could be, well, we want to fire our Google Ads conversion tag on a thank you page. But Google Tag Manager is not a human, it's a system, and Google Tag Manager does not know what a thank you page means. We need to be more specific. We need to instruct the system to behave as we want. So in this case, that's where variables become very handy. We want our trigger to fire not on any page view, but only on those pages where a variable, which is page URL, contains purchase successful, because we know that a visitor lands on this page only when that visitor has actually purchased something. So this is our conversion. Now you might be wondering, all right, so this might look quite clear. I mean, you can probably understand why this variable is used right here, but what about a variable in a tag? What kind of variable can we use in a tag and make use of it? And an example could be like this. What if we could send not only the fact of a conversion to Google Ads, but also the order value? And that's where another variable could be used. In this case, we could send the variable, which is order total, and that variable could send the value of $30 to Google Ads. And in this case, we could see not only the number of conversions, but we can also see the number of revenue that was generated because of Google Ads. The most popular tool that can be installed with Google Tag Manager is Google Analytics. That's why the first tag that I want you to install is Google Analytics page view tag. In the old days, before Google Tag Manager was a thing, the usual way to install Google Analytics was like this. You go to Google Analytics, go to admin, then go to tracking info and tracking code. This is the code that you had to ask your developers to add directly to the website source code. Now with Google Tag Manager, we can do the same thing ourselves. Basically, this piece of code is a tag. When this tag is activated, it will track page views of visitors who are browsing your website. So if we want to add this to Google Tag Manager, what we need to do is first of all, open the GTM interface and then go to tags, then click new, tag configuration, and choose Universal Analytics. There are two other options, but they are still in beta. Therefore, I currently recommend to use Universal Analytics. So click it. And instead of adding just the plain JavaScript code right here, we see some fields. So this is called tag template, and this is one of the benefits that you get with Google Tag Manager. Instead of having to deal with code and edit something and potentially, maybe do some mistakes, all we need to do is just to select several options in dropdowns, maybe checkboxes, enter something in certain fields, and that's it. So this is more friendly for non-developers. So let's create our first tag. First of all, if we want to install this code right here, basically what we need to choose is track type page view. This track type is an equivalent to adding this code on all pages. Then we need to configure the Google Analytics settings variable. But for now, I will skip it, but don't worry, I will cover that in the future. And right now, let's just click this checkbox, and then we need to enter the tracking ID in this field. Because if this tag is activated, we need to instruct Google Analytics to which exact property do we want to send the data. And we want to send the data to this particular property, and our tracking ID is this one. Of course, your tracking ID will be different than mine. Copy this ID and paste it right here. So this is the bare minimum that we need to do in a tag. When this tag is activated, it will send the page view and all the corresponding information about the page to this particular Google Analytics property. Then we need to set a trigger, the condition when we want to fire this tag. And we want to fire this tag on all pages. So this means that every time a page loads, we will send the page view to Google Analytics. And together with that page view, we will also track the traffic source, we'll see bounce rate and all the other default stuff. So in the triggering section, click anywhere right here or click on the pencil icon and then choose all pages. This is the only default trigger that you will have when you create a new container. Finally, let's name the tag. I usually like to name it with the name of the tag that I'm using. Then what kind of tag is this? So in this case, that is GA page view, and save the tag. Then we need to test whether this tag actually works and sends the data to Google Analytics. We can do that by enabling the preview mode by clicking right here. But if you already have enabled preview and debug mode from some time before, then you should click the refresh link right here. This is important. Every time you do some change in Google Tag Manager container and you want to preview that on your website, first you always need to refresh the preview and debug mode. So refresh it, then go to the website where you have injected your Google Tag Manager container, or let's say you have maybe added the code directly to the source code of that website, and then refresh the page. Then you will see the preview mode appear, and you will see on the container loaded, once you click it, you will see that your tag has fired. I have clicked container loaded because I have chosen the all pages trigger. In other words, all pages trigger means all container loaded events. Because if we go to other events, you will see that the tag has not fired because we set it to fire only on container loaded, also known as all pages trigger. Now let's go to Google Analytics and check whether that data was actually properly sent to GA and Google Analytics received that data. So let's go to Google Analytics, then go to real time, overview, and you will see the page view happening right here. Remember, a tag is a script that does something on your website. In our case, a tag tracks a page view and sends that page view data to Google Analytics. And actually, GA is not the only tool that is supported by Google Tag Manager. There are many other tag templates waiting to be used. So if you want to check them, you could go to tags, click new, and then in tag configuration, you will see a list of all the built-in tag templates that GTM supports. Here are some most popular Google products. Also, you can use some custom code. So for example, if you have some code that is not supported by default by Google Tag Manager, you can just use the custom HTML tag. And then there's a bunch of other built-in tag templates that you can use. For example, LinkedIn Insight tag, there's also Hotjar and others. If you want to add some tag, but you cannot find a tag template for that, this is not a problem because Google Tag Manager also supports the addition of custom JavaScript codes. So for example, let's say that you want to install a Drift chat on your website. That chat looks like this. At the bottom of the screen, a chat appears where your visitors can reply and then chat with your support agent. So when you go to Drift's interface, you will find an installation code that looks something like this. So if you copy that, you can still install it with Google Tag Manager. So let's take a look. Right now I am in my Google Tag Manager container. I am in tags. Then I click new because I want to add a new tag. Then I go to tag configuration, and in this list, if I use the search and enter Drift, I will not find anything. But this is not a problem, as I've mentioned. So if you want to add some custom JavaScript code, you should choose the custom HTML tag right here. So click it and then paste the code right here. This code is a JavaScript code because it is surrounded by script tags at the beginning and at the end of that code. Then we need to configure a condition when do we want this tag to fire. And in this case, that is all pages. That's why we should click anywhere on this triggering section and choose all pages. The last but not least, we should name this tag. I usually use the following naming convention: CHTML, which stands for custom HTML, and then enter the name of the tag. Hit save. Now the time has come to test whether this tag fires properly and the chat widget is displayed. So to do that, you need to refresh the preview and debug mode, then go to the website and refresh the website. We see that our Drift tag has fired on the container loaded, and we see the chat widget has appeared right here. So this means that the tag has been implemented properly and it is activated also properly. Triggers in Google Tag Manager are conditions that define when the tags will fire. They might be quite generic, like all pages, but also we can configure them to be much more specific. For example, let's imagine that we have a conversion tag that must be fired on the order confirmation page. In that case, we could create a much more specific trigger like this. We should go to triggers, then click new, trigger configuration, page view, and then we should define some specific condition. So usually the order confirmation page has something unique in the URL. For example, if your website is example.com, usually the order confirmation page contains something in the URL like order successful or order confirmed or thank you or something else. In my example, let's say that the order confirmation page's URL contains pages/purchase successful. And this is exactly what we could use in my Google Tag Manager trigger. So let's copy this part and then choose the variable. In this case, we need to use either the page path or page URL. Page path is the part of the URL that goes after the domain. So for example, right here, it is /pages/purchase successful. Also, page URL might work because page URL is the entire URL of the page. In fact, if I enabled the preview and debug mode right here, I could see the values of those variables in the preview mode. So let me just quickly do that. Now I have the preview mode enabled. Then if I refresh the page on the order confirmation, this is my preview and debug mode. Let me then choose container loaded, and in the variables you will see the values. So in this case, page path is this and page URL contains this value. So both of these will work for us because both of them contain pages/purchase successful. Which one should you choose? Well, there is no big difference in this case. That's why I think that I will use the page path. So let's go back to triggers, click new, trigger configuration, then page view and some page views. And now let's choose the variable. I will choose page path, contains, and then this part. Or I can use also equals. That depends on how precise I want this trigger to be. Now let's save the trigger. So for example, I usually enter the type of the trigger first and then what kind of trigger is that? I mean, what does it do? So in this case, that is page view. And then let's say order confirmation page. And then you could assign this trigger to a certain conversion tag that you want to fire on that order confirmation page. I will not do that in this case, but you get the idea. Don't forget to save this tag. Another cool thing in Google Tag Manager is the ability to track not only page views, but interactions as well. For example, clicks. So first of all, let's take a look at what is happening in the preview mode when I interact with the website. So I go to this page and let's say that we want to track these two link clicks. If I click this link, a PDF file will be downloaded to my laptop. And if I click this link, a Word file will be downloaded to my laptop as well. So first of all, make sure that you have enabled the preview and debug mode in your Google Tag Manager container and you see this orange banner. This is super important that you see this banner. And if you cannot see it, I will post a link below the video where you can troubleshoot your situation, because this is super important that you see this orange banner. After you enable or refresh your preview mode, then go to the website, refresh it, because you need to see this preview and debug mode right here. By default, Google Tag Manager preview and debug mode displays 3 events. These are 3 different stages of page load process. The first one is the container loaded. This is the earliest moment when you can fire your tag. If you want to track a certain interaction on a page, that interaction must appear right here. So let's take a look what happens if I click the link. A file is downloaded right here. However, nothing related to link click is visible right here. So this means that I cannot fire any tags on link clicks because nothing has appeared right here. This is because Google Tag Manager by default does not track any interactions except page views. We need to enable link click tracking functionality ourselves. We can do that by having at least one link click related trigger enabled on a page. So what we need to do right now is to go to Google Tag Manager, triggers, new, trigger configuration, just links, because we are interested right now in link clicks. And let's set this trigger to fire on all link clicks. So keep it as this. And then save the trigger. I usually call it all link clicks. Save the trigger. Now let's refresh the preview mode once again, then refresh the page where we are working on, and let's click any of these 2 links once again. Of course, in your case, you're probably working on some other website. Maybe those links look different because this is just a demo website that I use for this particular video. So if I click this link, I see that the file is downloaded, and also I see a link click event appear right here. This is a Google Tag Manager event. When I see that event right here, I can use this as a triggering condition to fire tags. And later I will show you how to send a link click event to Google Analytics. Because when a link click appears right here, Google Tag Manager spots that link click, and then on this particular interaction, we will be able to fire a Google Analytics event tag. When we are working with the built-in click tracking in Google Tag Manager, we should enable not only the link click trigger, but also click-related variables. You can find them by going to Google Tag Manager, variables, and then click configure in the built-in variables section. So click it right here and enable all the click-related variables right here. When you do that, wait until this saving loading disappears, then refresh the preview and debug mode, refresh the page where you want to track link clicks, and then let's click a link once again. We see the link click right here. I click it. If we go to variables, we will see the values of various click related variables. So for example, we can see what was the text of that clicked link. We also see the URL of that link. So this URL actually downloads a PDF file to my laptop. So let's imagine that in our case, we want to fire all link clicks that download either PDF or Word files. To do that, we will need to make our click trigger much more precise, because right now that link click trigger will fire tags, if of course those tags are linked with a trigger, on any link click. And we want to track only those link clicks that are related to PDF or docx file. So we need to go to Google Tag Manager, go to triggers, and update our trigger. Click on all link clicks trigger, and then in this section, choose not all link clicks, but some link clicks. First of all, I wanted to mention this, but I think that you have already noticed that this is the list of all the variables that are currently enabled or configured in your Google Tag Manager container. So if we want to track link clicks of, let's say, PDF or docx, we need to decide which variable should we use in the trigger. So let's take a look. Which variable tells us that this is a docx file and this is a PDF file? Well, one of the variables that we could use is click URL. The click URL of a PDF file contains .pdf. The click URL of the docx file contains docx. So what we could do right now is to go to Google Tag Manager, choose click URL, and then this is a tricky part. You cannot add multiple conditions like this right here. So for example, if you wanted to use the PDF or docx condition right here, this trigger would not work ever, because all of these conditions in a single trigger must be met. And the file's click URL does not contain PDF and docx at the same time. It's usually either one of them, this or this. But if you read this sentence, you will see that all of the conditions below must be met. That's why this option where click URL contains this or this will not work. What we could do and what we could use in this situation is a thing called regular expressions. Without digging too deep into this topic, I can just tell you that regular expressions are like special symbols and syntax that allow you to write certain conditions. And in this case, we need to know only one symbol, which is a pipe, also known as a vertical line. What we could do is that if we enter a condition where click URL then matches regex ignore case, PDF or docx, this trigger will activate a tag once this trigger is added to a tag. So to sum up, in this case, we have written a very basic regular expression where we will check the click URL. If that click URL contains PDF or, so a vertical dash, also known as a pipe, this one means or. So if the click URL contains PDF or docx, this trigger will be activated. And then let's rename the trigger. Then save it. And the next step is to create a Google Analytics event tag, because when that particular file link click occurs, we want to send this as an event to Google Analytics. So let's go to Google Tag Manager once again, go to tags, then click new, tag configuration, universal analytics, and then this time we need to choose another tag type, which is event. And there are several fields that should be filled in. Not all of them are required, but at least you should enter event category and event action. So in this case, let's say that event category is link click and action could be the actual URL of the file that was downloaded. And this is the beauty of Google Tag Manager. You can dynamically insert certain variables, and instead of just, some static values, we will be sending the actual value of this variable. So for example, if you have, let's say 10 links on a site, you can send the URL of a particular clicked link depending on what kind of link was clicked. Let me show you. In Google Tag Manager, go to action and then click on this Lego icon right here. Click it and then choose click URL. This is the variable and it will return the actual link of the file that was clicked. Then we should choose the GA settings variable, but this time for demonstration purposes, I will skip this part, but don't worry, I will soon explain how to use this. So let's enable this checkbox and then enter the tracking ID of our Google Analytics property. You can find it in GA, go to admin, then tracking info, tracking code, and copy this code, paste it right here. Then in the triggering section, we need to add our previously updated link click trigger. Click anywhere right here or on this pencil icon, then choose the link click trigger. And finally, let's name the tag. Save it and let's test it. First of all, as always, refresh the preview and debug mode, then refresh the page where we want to track file link clicks. And let's click both of these links, the first link, the second link, and you will see 2 link clicks appear in the preview and debug mode. Click the first one and you will see that your tag has fired. Click the second one and you will see that the tag has fired once again. Now we need to check whether this data was properly sent to Google Analytics, and we can do that by going to GA, real time, and events. And you will see that 2 events appeared right here. And what is cool about that is in the event action, we see the actual value of the clicked URL. I clicked the docx link once, and also I clicked the PDF link once. After a while, you will see these events not only in the real time, but also in behavior, events, and let's say top events. So after a while, you will start seeing these events right here. Just of course, make sure that you have selected today's data as well, because by default, Google Analytics ignores today's numbers in the reports. So to sum up, we have created a link click trigger. Then we have enabled click related variables in Google Tag Manager, like click classes, click ID, click URL, whatever. And then we have created a tag that sends the link click information to Google Analytics. So when a click happens, the trigger catches that click and then it is activated. And finally, because of that trigger, the tag fires and sends the click event to Google Analytics. Technically speaking, variables are little helper functions that you can use in your tags, triggers, and sometimes it even makes sense to use them in other variables. But since we are talking right now only about the very fundamentals of Google Tag Manager, you can think of variables as little pieces of information. They might contain a single data point, but also they can contain more complex structures of parameters, but they still contain some information. So speaking of, for example, click tracking, there is a bunch of click-related variables that return a certain value about that clicked element. For example, the click text, the click URL. If an element has some ID, then you can get that with the click ID. In fact, there are more built-in variables in Google Tag Manager, and they are related to certain types of interactions that can be tracked with Google Tag Manager. For example, if you go to variables and built-in variables, click configure, you will see other types of variables, such as form variables. So these will return information about the form that was submitted. Then if you're tracking, let's say, video player, and I mean YouTube video player, here is a bunch of video related variables in Google Tag Manager. If you want to track how your visitors scroll on your website, you can use scroll related variables and so on. If none of these built-in variables work for you, Google Tag Manager also offers a bunch of user-defined variables. But in this video, we will not dive deeper into that because the majority of them go beyond the very fundamentals of Google Tag Manager. Even though they belong to the beginner zone of Google Tag Manager Specialist, they are a bit more complex than the level of this video. But we can just take a quick peek at what kind of variables there are at all. So for example, if you go to user-defined variables and click new, you will see various variable types. You can click on variable configuration and you will see a list right here. I will name just a few variables because the majority of them go even to the intermediate or advanced level of Google Tag Manager Specialist. So for example, if you want to get a certain part of the URL, you can use a URL variable. If you want to get a certain first-party cookie that is stored on the browser of the visitor, you can use this variable. If you know how to code, you can use custom JavaScript and write more custom functions. Then there is a detailer variable, which is a very important topic to know, but this is more complex and this goes beyond the very fundamentals of Google Tag Manager. So if you want to learn more, I have a dedicated module within my Google Tag Manager Masterclass course for beginners That is a much more extensive course and will teach you what a data layer is, how to work with it, and what is a data layer variable. If you want to learn more about that course, I will post a link below this video. For example, if you want to access some custom data about a clicked element, you could use auto event variable. Then there is a Google Analytics settings variable. In fact, in this video, a bit later, I will cover this variable as well, because this one is very much important and I use that in every setup with Google Tag Manager. And there is a bunch of other variables, but you get the idea that there are many possibilities right here. And if you want to configure some user-defined variables, you can definitely do that. All right, so speaking of variables, variables can be used in tags, and we have already done that in the GA event tracking. When a file link click was captured, we send the value of the click URL, so this is the variable, to Google Analytics. And you can identify where the variable is and where it's just a static text by seeing these two curly braces. So a variable in Google Tag Manager is always surrounded by double curly braces. Regular text is just a regular text. If you want to insert a certain variable in a field, you can do that by choosing one of the two ways. The first way is to click this button right here. If you click it, you can choose from all the variables that are configured in your Google Tag Manager container. And the other option is just to enter double curly braces with your keyboard, and then you will get that list. If you want, you can add even more than one variable in the same field. That is perfectly fine, but of course, do that if it makes sense. You can insert Google Tag Manager variable only in those fields where this button is next to that field. So for example, if you see a field somewhere in GTM and that field does not have this button, that variable will not work in that particular field. If you want, you can also insert variables in custom HTML tags. So let me just show you a quick example. If you go to tags, go to new, then tag configuration and choose custom HTML tag. First of all, let's define that this is a JavaScript code. So we need to add two tags. In this case, this is HTML tags, so script and the closing script tag. Now Google Tag Manager will know that this is JavaScript. And if you want to use a variable somewhere in your code, you just need to enter double curly braces with your keyboard. So like this. And then you will be able to insert that variable and write some custom code. Of course, you need to know how to code for that. But if you know some JavaScript basics, you can do that quite easily by following this example. Speaking of triggers, variables are a very important part of them. Let me just quickly show you. Go to triggers, and if we go, let's say, to that PDF or docx file trigger, you click it, you will see that one of three fields in the condition is variables. For example, right here, if you click it, you will see all the variables that are enabled in your container. And as you can see, this field does not have the Lego button. Therefore, you cannot insert variables right here because that will not work. I mean, you can insert, but they will not work as variables. They will just work as a regular text. So if you have some variables configured in your Google Tag Manager container, then you can preview them in the preview and debug mode right here in this variables tab. And you can see how their values are changing on each event in this event stream. So for example, on the container loaded event, no element was clicked yet. Therefore, all click variables return undefined values. But once we clicked something, we suddenly start getting some values about that click as well. Now I would like to go back to user-defined variables and actually create one, which is the default that should be used in your Google Tag Manager container if you're working with Google Analytics. So let's go to variables, and I will show you how to create a Google Analytics settings variable. But actually before that, I would like to explain the problem that this variable solves. So right now in my Google Tag Manager container, there are already two Google Analytics tags, one for page view and one for event. And once you start working more with GTM and Google Analytics, you will start noticing that the number of GA tags will increase. In the future, you might have 10, 20, 50, maybe even 100 or more tags of Google Analytics in Google Tag Manager container. So if we go to the first tag, which is page view, what you will notice is that I intentionally skipped the GA settings variable field, and instead I chose to override and insert the tracking ID on the tag level. Now, this is not a big deal if you're working with one or two tags, but imagine that you have 50 tags in your Google Tag Manager container and all of them have tracking ID configured on the tag level. So I mean by enabling this checkbox and then entering it right here. So what will happen on each tag, you will have that particular parameter configured. And if you have a bunch of those tags, the management of them will become much more difficult, because imagine a situation which is, well, not that actually rare. So a situation where you need to change the tracking ID from something to something else. So for example, from XXX1 to XXX2 or something else. Because, well, you decided with your client to start fresh, and because the previous setup was incorrect, you decided to have a new property and, I don't know, do something with that. So if you have this situation right here where on every tag a tracking ID is configured, then you would need to go and edit tag one by one and change that tracking ID on one tag, on another tag, and so on. And this is, first of all, is irritating, it is time consuming, and also it may cause some errors. So for example, if you accidentally enter an ID in this tag a little bit differently, and that ID basically causes that this tag will be sending data somewhere else, or maybe it will not be sending data at all. So if you want to prevent that, what you could do is that you could use a JSettings variable. That JSettings variable contains all the settings of the tags. So for example, what is the ID, or maybe there are some additional conditions that you want to apply to all of the tags. So in that case, if all of your 50 Google Analytics tags were using this variable, then it would be enough to change the tracking ID or some other setting only on the level of that variable. And then all the tags that use this variable, they will automatically inherit that change. And this is very convenient, especially if you're working with larger containers. So to sum up, instead of having all of the tags with this setting enabled, and then instead of adding tracking ID on each individual tag, you could just create one JSettings variable and then define it right here. And then all of your tags that use this variable will inherit all those settings from that particular variable. So let's do that in this video. Let's create a JSettings variable and let's add it to all of the G tags that we have in our container. So now I will copy this tracking ID, then disable this checkbox, and then click the new variable option in the JSettings variable field. And now I will be asked to create a new variable. So I will paste my tracking ID right here. And there's also another setting, which is by default set to auto. So this means that visitors will be properly tracked across all the subdomains of my website. Because maybe I have a website that is blog.example.com, support.example.com, and so on. So if this setting is configured and set to auto, this means that all of these subdomains will track my visitors properly. And then let's enter the variable name. Let's say GA settings, and then paste the ID and save it like that. Now this variable will be automatically inserted in this field right here. And then I should edit all the other GA tags in my container. And right now I have only one other tag, which is GA event. So let me click it right here. And then I will edit it. I will disable this checkbox and select the existing JSettings variable right here. And if you have, let's say 5, 10, or 50 tags, do that, because this will save you more time in the future. Yes, in the beginning, this might cause you more time, but in the long run, you will definitely win. Then after you do all the changes, you should definitely test, because, well, you know, some bad things might happen if you don't. So I would highly recommend, after doing every change in your container, you should test that with the preview and debug mode. So enable preview and debug mode by clicking this button right here. Then I will go to the website. First of all, I will refresh the website, and then I will go to real-time reports of Google Analytics. I should start seeing my page view right here, and here it is. And then I will also try to fire all the other tags that are in my container. So in this case, I have another tag, which is file download. So let me click one file download link like right here. Here I have downloaded the file, the tag is fired. And if we take a closer look right here, so for example, I will click it, and I can even see what is happening in the preview and debug mode and what variables were inserted in certain fields. And in fact, if I switch at the top from names to values, you can even see what kind of values were sent with this tag to Google Analytics. And since this event tag has fired, I can go to Analytics, then real-time and events, and then I will see that event appear right here, and this is the event information that was sent to Google Analytics. And if you had some additional settings that you wanted to apply to all your Google Analytics tags, you could do that once again in this variable, and then all of the tags that use this variable will inherit that change. And more settings can be found right here. You go to that variable, click more settings, and then you can play around with them. These, of course, are once again a bit beyond the basics, so I will not explain them in this video. So to sum up, tags are JavaScript codes that you add to Google Tag Manager and they do something. Triggers are the conditions when those tags must fire, and variables are pieces of information, or let's say maybe some functions that help you make triggers more specific and also send some additional data with those tags to your third-party tools like Google Analytics, Google Ads, Facebook Pixel, or something else. So if we try to illustrate this example, Google Ads conversion tag is a tag because when it is fired, it sends the data about the conversion to Google Ads. Then on a thank you page is a trigger. The type of this trigger is page view, and the URL right here is the variable because we need to make the page view trigger more precise. So if the page URL contains or page path contains purchase successful or something else, depending on what is the URL of your thank you page, then this trigger will be activated and this trigger will fire this tag. And together with this tag, we can send some additional data, let's say order total, which in this case is $30. All right, so now we should have a better understanding of what are tags, triggers, and variables in Google Tag Manager, and obviously how are they connected. If you found some parts of this lesson a bit confusing, don't worry, we have all been there, and the best way to overcome that confusion is to actually continue working with Google Tag Manager. Also, I have a free ebook which is called Google Tag Manager for Beginners, so if you want to learn some additional details, make sure to download that ebook by clicking the link below this video. If you found this lesson useful, click thumbs up below this video and also consider subscribing for more tutorials about Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics. My name is Julius, this is Analytics Mania, and I'll see you in the next video.